Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Building Healthy, Equitable Communities, a training series from ChangeLab Solutions. This is a virtual space to explore the elements of a just community and the conditions that will help all children and families thrive. Back in April, we began releasing collaborative episodes which offer training and discussion on how policy plus community power can advance health equity. You can see the full schedule and our 6 episode topics here or on our series homepage. Our kickoff episode explored health equity as a principle and a practice and set a high-level theoretical framework for how to use law and policy to advance health equity. The rest of our episodes lay out strategies for operationalizing this framework. For example, our 2nd episode explored advancing health equity through policies and systems that support working families. Our 3rd episode looked at advancing health equity through a just food system and equitable procurement. And last month, we wrapped up our 4th episode, which looked at comprehensive long-range planning and other place-based strategies as a driver of health equity. All of these episodes are now up for your viewing on our website, and as you can see, the link is in the top right corner of the screen. Today we're here for episode 5, Building Healthy, Equitable Communities Through Transforming the School Climate. And just like the previous episodes, this webinar will be posted on our website, so you can revisit today's conversation in case you miss anything. If you're wondering what exactly is an episode, let's just quickly recap. Each episode contains 3 things. First, we publish a blog post which shares the consequences of laws and policies that don't take health equity into account and how we can respond. In episode 5, we looked at 5 promising policy avenues to transform the physical and social environments in schools and promote the healthy development of the whole child. Then we host a webinar that provides both on-the-ground stories and innovations from community health leaders, as well as resources to support your work in healthy change making. This past Tuesday's webinar explored why exclusionary school discipline policies are a public health crisis alongside promising alternatives. We were joined by Kristen Harper from Child Trends, as well as Linda Darling-Hammond, President of the Learning Policy Institute. The recording will be up soon, so if you missed it, not to worry. You'll receive an email once it's available. Finally, we close each episode by moderating an interactive expert panel, and that's what we're here for today. Today's amazing panel features innovators in connecting students to their school, managing discipline problems, and promoting health equity in schools. Before introductions, let's quickly touch on format. We sourced questions for today's conversations from you all through the blog, the webinar, and panel registration page. We've aggregated these questions and will now pose them to our panel. That being said, though, if you have any questions that arise during the panel, please feel free to enter them into the chat box on your screen, and we'll do our best to try to get to them. And so you can put a face to the voice. I'm Alexis Etow. I'm a senior staff attorney at ChangeLab Solutions, where I work at the intersection of education and health. And this work focuses on developing legal and policy strategies that advance safe and supportive learning environments, resiliency, and health equity. I'm honored and deeply humbled to be moderating today's important conversation, especially with such an incredible group of education, civil rights, juvenile justice, and law and policy experts. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers to introduce themselves and their organizations, and then we'll move into conversation. So we'll be starting with Heather and Doreen, and then move to Ruth. And I also wanted to note that unfortunately Thalia González is not able to join us today. She had a family care need that she needed to attend to, but I did want to acknowledge that she's been just an invaluable partner to us, and we will miss her contributions, but definitely send her our best. So with that, I'll turn it over to Heather and Doreen.
Hello, I'm Heather Sattler, and I'm in my 23rd year of teaching in the Milwaukee Public Schools, and in my 8th year at the Alliance School of Milwaukee. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee Nations here in Milwaukee. And I've been working with our students and our staff and our community to build the youth-led model of restorative practices at the Alliance School for the last 7 years, and it's still definitely in process. And I hold the question, who do I have to be And how do I have to teach to create space for my students to access their power and lead authentically? And I'm really honored to have one of my students who just graduated last year here with me.
Hi, my name is Doreen Thomas. I am currently a double major at Alexis College, studying philosophy and business. I was a circle keeper at Alliance for 2 years, and an assistant teacher to Heather for my final senior year. I have taught at Harvard University. I've taught at Northwestern University as well as Carroll University to show the work of restorative practices. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Ruth Cusick, and I'm a senior supervising attorney in the statewide education rights project at Public Counsel. We have a community lawyering practice, and for the last 10 years, I have been supporting community organizers and the parents and young people that they support in both policy change at the school district, county, and state level to confront racial justice in our schools and shift school climate and discipline practices. Some of my closest partners are Cadre in South LA, and I'll talk quite a bit about their school climate and discipline monitoring, and we're also part of the Dignity in Schools campaign, both the California and national coalitions. Thank you.
Thank you. We're so excited to have all of you here today. So let's go ahead and dive into our questions. So starting with the first one, in our webinar on Tuesday, we talked about disparities in exclusionary school discipline practices, how children of color and children with disabilities continue to be pushed out of schools at higher rates than their white peers. We also talked about several promising strategies, like restorative justice practices and social emotional learning, both of which help create safer and more equitable learning environments. I was wondering if maybe Doreen, you could start us off by talking about some of the examples that you've had or seen with these strategies or others in addressing the disproportionality of exclusionary school discipline practices.
Well, the first thing I'll say is at Alliance we do a few things. Some of the things that I saw that I felt like really made a difference in a lot of the men and women of color were we hold men and women's groups at least once a month, and we talk about different issues that affect our community, productive ways to just move through the community, especially in Milwaukee. There's a lot of crime and things like that. So just making sure that students are safe and basically being able to come in and speak about issues that they're dealing with or just different ways that they've been affected. We also hold school-wide circles, which is led, and everything I'm stating, by the way, is also all student-led, which also makes it powerful in itself. But we also hold a school-wide circle, which is held with every student in the building as well as every staff member. Every room is filled. And the circles are led by circle keepers, created by circle keepers, and are all handpicked by circle keepers, whether it is an issue that we feel is outside of the school that we feel is relevant or is going to affect the students, or it could be something that's happening within the school building itself. Rather, we feel like there is tension between staff and students, or it could be something as basic as school lunch. But just being able to sit in circle and state how you feel, and even having other students sometimes sit there and scribe about different issues makes it really powerful. We also have we just really try and focus on just really making students feel inclusive. And I know personally when I used to lead school-wide circles, I used to want what some teachers would refer to as the bad students, quote, you could say. And I wanted to work with those students that teachers sometimes had a hard time with, because I felt like those were the students that had the most stories, but also could be the students that were really the most powerful and could lead the most. And a lot of those students, I chose them because I felt like they reflected myself as an individual, because at a point in time, I felt like I was very rebellious, and I sometimes did things that I wasn't supposed to. And I felt like working with those students and allowing them to see the vulnerability of myself and tell them different stories about myself and different things that I used to do, and giving them productive ways to deal with, whether it was anger or issues that was going on at home, just finding ways to, have outlets for those things, I feel like make a difference, as well as with us holding circles, working with staff members, also making sure that staff members feel supported in what we do, and also making sure that staff members have a way to kind of offer a little bit of their vulnerability and tell a little bit of their story, builds a bond, which makes, to myself personally, makes Alliance different from any other high school in the state. Thank you.
Ruth, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Sure, and thank you, Doreen, for what you shared. And I know both Doreen and Heather will share more about the model. There is work happening in Los Angeles on restorative justice practices, but because we have our practitioners here today, I'll defer on that. But there's also been a lot of work in Los Angeles that I've helped monitor with cadre parent leaders in South LA around school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports, and how creating more collaborative systems that are proactive, also where there are clear guidelines around the kind of issues that should be handled in the classroom and what issues that folks outside the classroom need to support. So what we've seen in Los Angeles is that we've had huge decreases in suspensions overall in this work, and that has been partly by taking one of the categories that was so rife for racial disproportionality, which is willful defiance, taking that off the table and banning that as a suspension offense. And that's what we've seen across the state in California, and we're working now to pass a law to try to ban willful defiance in all grades. And I think all different states have these same kind of vague, disruption, defiance kind of things, that's made a big difference. But even in taking that off, that we still see a racial gap in our work, and that confronting implicit bias, what Doreen's talking about, really changing relationships and creating a space for people to connect. And then I'll share more about cadre's monitoring work a little later, and how involving families around database decision making has the power to really confront disproportionality as well. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Doreen, I was wondering if we could circle back. You mentioned the circle keeping that you've done, and I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about your role as a circle keeper, kind of what that looks like, and also what the experience has been like for you.
Well, I've had quite the experience as a circle keeper, to put that in the smallest bit of terms. Like I said before, I was a circle keeper for 2 years. As a circle keeper, I took on a lot because I really believed in the work, and I really saw the impact that it made on students being a circle keeper and doing what I did. So as a circle keeper, a lot of times I would hold what we call repair harm circles, which is if there were 2 students that were having an issue, I would pull each student aside by themselves and kind of ask them for their side of the story, which traditionally we always do as a class. So that way it gives the student a safe space to express how they feel without feeling pressured in any way, shape, or form. We also always make sure that we tell them that it's a judgment-free zone, and that we're going to make sure that we listen without bias. And you do that with both students before bringing them together. And that really, really made a difference, just making sure students were heard. Also, as a circle keeper, like I said before, we taught at Harvard University. We talked about oppression. We did hours and hours and hours and days of research before going to teach at the School of Education, and just showing them our model and how we use it at Alliance. and productive ways that they could also use it as well. Like I said before, we spoke with a lot of educators, so we made sure that we gave them productive ways to go back and take restorative practices to wherever they were. At Carroll University as well, I taught some of their staff and some students from a summer camp how to use restorative practices and different ways that they could use it in their communities. The students that I spoke with at the summer camp were leaders in their high schools, so it was a great experience. Just so many different things that I did. Also, myself and a few of my peers from the advanced circle keeper class taught at Northwestern University in Illinois at the law school, which I was really excited about because I plan on going into law. But we also taught some educators there and some students that were involved in different things at their school as well as professors. And being a circle keeper, honestly, I could say that being a circle keeper is probably one of the best jobs that I've ever held and ever had, and still continue to do. Being a circle keeper really let me know that as an African-American woman that I could make an impact in my community, and I could also use my platform to inspire young women and men that look just like me. Growing up in Milwaukee, sometimes you feel like there are not a lot of opportunities and there aren't a lot of productive ways for any child sometimes to succeed. So I feel like going to a school where I could feel like my voice mattered and going to a school where I could give my impact on something, or going to a school just where myself and my peers could come to a staff member with an issue and they actually would address it, really made me feel like when I began at the next level going to Alverno that I could take those skills that I learned and, use those there. And I'm working on trying to start circles there and things like that. So being a circle keeper really let me know that I could be a leader not only in my school but in my community and so forth in life, and I could instill those values in others to come. Thank you.
Thank you. It's incredible that you did all of that in 2 years, and really cool to hear that you're continuing that amazing work. Thank you for sharing. I definitely want to hear more about that, but I do want to address a question that came up during the webinar. We've heard from educators who have incorporated restorative practices into their curriculums and seen a lot of positive effects. But some of these practices may not fully mitigate trauma exposure and impacts of poverty for many of our students. And even despite their best efforts to create warm and engaging classrooms, some students continue to harm other students or disrupt class. So I'm curious, what are some of the best practices when it comes to addressing behaviors that break school rules, that threaten the safety of other students or disrupt classroom learning? Another way of kind of framing this question is, how can we ensure that all children in the classroom feel safe while still meeting the needs of the child who may harm others physically and or emotionally? And if, Heather, you want to take that question first, that'd be great, and then we could pass it on to Ruth.
So I want to be really clear. We really see ourselves as a work in progress at the Alliance School. And what's so beautiful about the work of restorative practices and circle keeping is that it's very much about having a listening for ourselves and for our community. It's also about being very clear about our intentions. And so when we're working with our students, we're very clear that we must work with ourselves first and foremost. And then also we must be very clear about our intentions working with our young people and creating a space for them to really access their power. So the disposition is really critical. As I was preparing for this work today, I was thinking a lot about the dispositions that I hold and that we hold and the intentions that we hold and how powerfully that connects to our practices. So I want to go further. We look at our students and we try to understand why they do what they do. We try to understand what needs they're expressing. We try to support our students. We create space for them to see themselves and to understand why they're doing what they're doing and help them to see what it is they need and to articulate that in a way that's powerful, in a way that can help them to access support. And then if they are doing something that's hurting themselves or others in our community, working with them to get to a place where they can recognize how their behavior truly impacts other people, and then get to a place where they can take responsibility and actually rebuild relationships that may have been harmed or to heal. So that's a really important disposition that we hold. We also hold that this work is about choice and that we all enter from the place we are standing. And that's a really, really critical piece. So on to some pragmatic structures that we have in place while we hold all of that. We've had a full inclusion model of special education and practice since I've been at this school. And so really what that looks like is the two teachers working together. One of them is a special education teacher, one is a regular education teacher, but the two are working in the classroom to co-teach the class. And it's really looking at designing the learning to really support what students need. We understand that when students act out, there's a reason. If something happens in the classroom, the intention is to keep the learning moving and have the other person, whomever has the relationship with the student, whoever knows what's going on, work with that student separately. I asked my students about this question too, and the resounding answer from my students was the importance of having a safe space in the school. They talked about my classroom being a safe space, and they talked about the relationship that we have as being very powerful. And they also noted that really pretty much every teacher in this building can provide a safe space because of the relationship. So it's really, we really cultivate our relationships with each other as a staff, and we really cultivate our relationship with our students, and we create space for our students to be in relationship with each other as well. When we're working with our students and we're looking at behavior, we do look at the data and recognize patterns of behavior with our students. And so what we do with the data is, again, we try to access the needs that students are having, and then we'll break them down. So we'll look at if students have some really basic needs. You know, we're working with some young people who are dealing with homelessness. We're working with young people who are dealing with some extraordinary circumstances in their lives. So we look at how we can support them in being safe and having their basic needs met. We also invite students to engage with psych services as necessary. And then we also work with special education needs. But the whole disposition here is really about working with our students, listening to our students, listening to the parents, the guardians of our students, because our assumption is that we all have within us the will and the knowledge to move through and heal and work with ourselves. So that's the place of strength that we move from for ourselves and with our students as we do our work. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Ruth. Heather, that was just so beautiful and comprehensive. I hardly have anything to add, but I would just really reinforce what Heather shared about what it means to do things to students and families versus with them, and that in supporting the parent organizers I work with, parent leaders in South Central LA, that has been such a key issue to, be walking into schools and, kind of being treated like the worst is assumed about you versus, as Heather shared, what capacity there is and what can happen if we collaborate. I also, really want to honor that the question is talking about serious issues, but in so many I didn't share in the beginning that our practice does a lot of school discipline defense. So we represent young people who are being recommended for expulsion. And what we have seen over and over again is how much with a lack of those deeper relationships, things escalate, and what we can be doing in schools to support that pause, to de-escalate, to actually understand what's going on at the root cause of an issue. So I'll just add that. Thanks.
I'd like to add one more thing, if I may.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I want to talk about, I will talk further about our restorative practices model here, but one of our practices is something that we call a peer counsel. And so it's a Tier 3 intervention. And so that's basically for a young person who has gone through a great deal and is continuing a behavior pattern that is harmful to the student or harmful to the community. And so we work really intensively with the young person. And so it's beyond a repair of the harm circle. It really gets into working intensely with the student and working with the group of circle keepers where they really build a relationship. Our students are amazing. I mean, I've watched, I get to watch magic happen every day. And so when we're sitting here in the classroom, young people who have walked in that same space are working with someone who's going through the same situation, and they have a way of holding them, seeing them, creating space for them to see themselves in a way without judgment or shame, right? But creating a space to do that. And so we work with the young person to understand why they're doing what they're doing, what they need, and then we develop a comprehensive plan where they get to the space of understanding what they've done and why they've done it and what they can do to repair or heal. And we work with them so that they can actually have this ongoing practice. They have a staff person who will work with them. We'll have a community person work with them. We will have one of our students work with them. And so we get them to come back into the community with dignity, doing something that's really meaningful. And we also find out what they love to do, and then we look at how we can mentor them in cultivating something that they're really good at. And we have a staff that's amazing at pulling out kids' abilities and strengths because we all have different backgrounds. And so people will come in and support whether one of our students loves to DJ. And so we have a staff member who's on staff and does DJ work, or we have an incredible a teacher who's an incredible artist and has engaged our students in doing social justice related artwork. And so we try to turn destruction into something that we look at the need and look at what can really be done and healed and move forward. And so that's one of the deeper interventions that we hold. And in the time that I've been here, I would say all but one time the peer counsel model has been effective in keeping the student in our school. And that's our intention, is to keep our kids in our school.
Thank you. You're doing such incredible work. Yeah, it's just really inspiring. Can you, kind of following up on that question, you talked a lot about just the amazing work you're doing directly with the students. Can you talk a little bit about how you might engage parents and kind of equip them with some of the resources to also be advocates for this work?
Yes, and I want to say something else too. I will talk about that. I think one of the things as a staff here, there are times when we aren't able to keep students in our school. And I want to tell you the amount of deliberation that goes into those moments when we're looking at moving a student from our school. And the ultimate question is always, is what we are doing for this young person in their best interest, and are we able to really support them and give them what we need? And so I want you to know that that's a really hard conversation, and we stay in that space with our students and our parents often. So I want to put that out there. So in terms of the model of restorative practices that we have here, we work with all new parents and new students come to our school, and the circle keepers who are experienced will facilitate a circle with new students, and then our staff will facilitate circles with their parents. And it's a way for them to immediately engage with our philosophy about connecting and working with our community. The big part about this work, and this is something my students said, is that this work gives them a voice, that there is support, and that it gives them an opportunity to really authentically connect with our staff and really build relationships. So I just want to speak a little bit about the model itself. Essentially, all of our staff are trained in restorative practice, and we really work with ourselves first and foremost. And I really do want to take a moment to honor that this work comes to us from the very wise Native elders from Canada and from the northern United States. And so the tradition that we hold here, we understand that we are holding very sacred work, and we are holding not just a way, right? It's not just a practice of sitting in the circle, which is a very important practice. It's not just a pragmatic strategy, which is a very important pragmatic strategy, but also it's a way of being. So we really hold that here. And we think about circle as the heart of restorative practice at Alliance, because it's that space where we really cultivate a deep listening for ourselves and others, and essentially connect with the truth of who we are, because we're meant to be connected. But the reality is that we live in a society where there are a lot of external constructs that have us being divided, and we're all feeling the impacts of systematic oppression. And so we have a space to really unpack how that impacts us internally and as a community. And so that's really important. So to that end, our staff is all trained in restorative practices. We hold the work in our staff meetings with each other to process through concerns, to brainstorm, to do many different practices. There's 3 classes that I teach. There's a sophomore, a junior, and a senior class. The sophomores learn the work through literature, through practice, and they create and facilitate a circle for the freshmen that's relative to the work that they're doing in their freshman English class. The juniors hold the work in the school, so they really cultivate a deep understanding of who they are and how they develop the stories that they have about themselves, and they really deepen this understanding that true liberation really lies in shifting our stories. And so they do a lot of that work with themselves. Plus they hold the school community in doing those quarterly school-wide circles, which they lead and facilitate. And then they also participate in the Repair the Harm circles, and they do some teaching in the community. The senior class that Doreen spoke about is really committed to teaching the work and sharing it more widely in the larger community. And so that's taken us, like Doreen said, as far as Boston to Harvard University to the Northwestern School of Law last year, and in our local community. So my students have, every year the senior class comes in, we sit down and we look at what's in their hearts, what they care about, what's happening in our community, and then we begin to connect. This year we're working with the DA's office and folks who go through the juvenile justice system, and when they go through a victim offender conference, sometimes the victim doesn't want to speak, so the young person will have an opportunity to sit with my students and me through this process. We're also connecting with the local ACLU and collaborating on the work, so my students will be facilitating circles out in the community. So we're doing a lot of work that's really generated from the students' passions and interests, and they're really deeply committed to sharing the work. And so the work continues to evolve. And I work with another woman, and she and I facilitate trainings in the community, and our students participate in coaching and working in those trainings with us. So the work continues to evolve. I can't believe how much it's evolved in the last 8 years. I never imagined we would be standing here at this place. But what I've continued to do is just hold the space and listen to our community and to listen to my students, and we co-create and we move as we need to. So when you're talking about meeting the needs of students and parents, it's really simple. It's about listening. It's simple and it's hard at the same time, right? But a wise person was saying to me yesterday when I was having a very busy day and I was feeling really frazzled, she said, you know, Heather, just ground yourself, because sometimes just by virtue of you being and listening, you're creating a space for them to see themselves. And that's something that I hold with me all the time, and I was so grateful that she reminded me of that. So listening is very powerful. And then backing it up and giving people a space to move into action. Not doing for, not doing to, working together, working with. I understand my privilege, and I understand the kind of access that I have. And so I do what I can to create spaces for my students to move in the ways that they believe are important, and I make sure that they have the grounding and that I have the grounding necessary to do the work that we are asking to do and that we're doing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. This is Ruth again for sharing all that you're doing and for being so honest about the process that it is. There are a lot of promising practices happening in LA Unified and across the county, and we have very impassioned and committed restorative justice coordinators at some of our schools, but I have been supporting in this last 10 years monitoring of school-wide positive behavior intervention supports with cadre parent leaders, because for them in their schools in South Central, in Watts, they had experienced so much retaliation for their activism and so many issues around racial justice that they have really connected to the power of some of the key features of school-wide positive behavior interventions and supports that include having a school team that looks together at very specific data around what students are being disciplined in class. And so it's so exciting to hear Heather share, and I think about where some schools might be starting and just beginning a dialogue and being able to share data transparently with families who've been impacted by exclusionary discipline, how powerful that can be in shifting things. And so I think just as Heather shared, from shifting from acting for or acting to with, that's what parents in South LA are advocating for, a chance to transform school climate and culture together with students and with school staff. Thanks.
Thank you both for sharing those insights and examples. It's really incredible work. I want to build kind of on this idea of just meaningfully engaging parents and also students in creating better school environments. And I was wondering if Doreen, kind of based on the work you talked about earlier, what advice would you give to teachers and students at other schools who might be interested in doing the work you've done at the Alliance School?
Well, the first thing that I would say, which is something that I say to every person every time they give me this question, is it needs to start at the top. It can't start in the middle. It can't start with, like, Miss Jenkins and her class, and, like, she read an article and she thought restorative practices was dope. Like, I mean, of course, shout out to those Miss Jenkins around the world that want to try it. But what makes it so powerful at Alliance is, like Heather said, every staff member is trained, and that I've seen a lot of teachers that have tried restorative practices, and you have staff members that don't necessarily respect restorative practices or have never tried it or have never experienced it, so they don't understand it, so they start to build this negative idea about it. So that's the first tip that I would give. The next tip that I would give is to realize that, like, for anyone that comes in and looks at our model, that sometimes you have to adapt things to your students and what they need, because every student is not the same. Every student isn't going to take in everything the same. So that's something to think about. Another thing that I will say is that you have to really understand that it's not going to be easy. There are days when I was in Circle that I didn't want to say anything, or there'll be days in Circle where you have students that want to walk out or students that feel overwhelmed. So understand that every Circle will not be perfect. Another thing is just, like, I feel like just start and make sure you actually have faith, you know. Don't do it just because you're like, oh, well, I read this article and I heard this was going to be cool, so I'm just going to try it because I'm tired of students being bad. Actually have faith in the work, because myself personally, I feel like when you have a facilitator and they're facilitating a circle, when they're passionate about whatever the circle is about, or they really begin to show parts of themselves that they didn't really share with other people, that is what makes Circle powerful. When you start to peel back those layers of certain things that you didn't necessarily always want to share with someone, but you feel compelled to share it, means that sometimes that person to the left, that might be just exactly what they need to hear. There have been a lot of times in Circle where I felt compelled to share certain things that I didn't necessarily feel comfortable with at first, and realized that every person in the room had gone through everything that I had gone through, which made us just a little bit tighter. And I know that it was brought up earlier that the idea of making students feel safe, that starts with that teacher as well, making sure that students really feel like it's a safe space. And sometimes that means that a teacher might talk about something that they used to do when they were younger that they feel like relates to that student. And then the next student might see the other student in the hallway that might be talking about something that was said in Circle and be like, hey, man, don't say that, you know, because you start to build a respect and you guys start to build trust for each other, and then it becomes more powerful. Another thing I will add is that even with you starting to
broadcasting live from the Alliance School.
Another thing that I will add is that every staff member is not going to agree with Circle, but just the fact that they were exposed to it, over time, if they start to see a change in students, they'll get behind it, even if they don't necessarily care for it, because Circle will not be for everybody. So that's something too. Another thing I'll say is that Circle is voluntary, and it should always, 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 I can't say it enough, but it should always be voluntary, because when you force someone into a space where they're not comfortable or they don't want to do it, especially when they're not in the headspace, it's going to create more friction, and it will not work. You want to make sure that every person, when they come into circle, is comfortable, or you try and find healthy ways to make them feel comfortable, which sometimes can be challenging. Different things that we do is that we do like icebreakers, which is where we play different games to get people to kind of open up, or we'll have a check-in question, which might be something that's kind of funny, like or it could be something simplistic, like what's your favorite food, or what's your favorite color, or if you were a superhero, what would your power be? Just different things like that. Or we've even had circles where we've told fart stories, which sounds crazy, but, you know, just being able to look next to the person next to you and just chuckle a little bit just makes the day a little bit easier, you know? Thank you.
Completely. Thank you. That was great. And you touched on something, too, about just the importance of staff members really feeling supported. And I was wondering, Heather, if you could maybe talk a little bit about opportunities for building the capacity of teachers. One of the questions we received was around how do we make sure that we're not overburdening already overworked and underpaid teachers with this kind of additional ask to do practices like this.
I was so grateful for that question. I think it's such an important one. And also, you know, I think about whatever I ask of my students, I ask of myself first, period. And I think that's when I've worked with teachers or when I've taught folks from other organizations, I'm thinking the same thing. I can't say enough about the importance of administrative support in this work, and I'm talking about administrators really sitting down and having the experience, particularly with youth leading, so that people can feel this work in their bodies. You know, we talk about the circle as really holding the space with the understanding that we do, like I said before, see it as the heart of restorative practice. But there is something very powerful about that space and the discipline of that space in terms of listening and the power of the talking piece. But that work carries over in a very big way. And so what I want to say is that I think teachers have to experience the work themselves, right? You know, Doreen has often said to me, and she's sharing a note with me right now, how I have talked about my students. She said, you know, Heather, it would sound like you're talking about your colleagues. And I think what's really important is that teachers have the opportunity to enter the work in a way that they feel comfortable. And so one of the ways that we have shared the work is by having my students go and facilitate circles. And just so teachers could feel what the work is for themselves and see really how powerfully young people can lead. And, you know, those of us who are in education really melt when we see young people leading powerfully. At least that's what happens to me. But the first thing is that, you know, with all the stress and all the things that are going on, I think our teachers are needing support. So I think it's really important to start with people who are facilitators, creating a space for teachers to talk about what's happening for them, how they're being affected, what they can do to move forward in their situation, how they can access their own power, you know, whether it's having a circle once a month just to support, to begin, but also to talk about what's going well and to really think about how they can learn from each other and learn in terms of what's working. I think this is something that has to be done by choice. So I'll just share a short story. There was a school that was interested in the work. They have a staff of about 60 people. One of their people called me and said, our staff is really interested in this work. Could you come and facilitate a training? But we're experiencing some resistance with our staff. And I said, I think I know some people who can deal well with resistance. And so I asked my students if they'd be interested. And so what my students did, we had 12 of us, 12 students, and we went to the staff of 60 people. It was their opening week of school. And my students led the entire time. It was a 90-minute session where they had the staff in a large circle, then broke them into smaller circles, and really facilitated a circle with them, having them think about who they want to be that school year and what might challenge them and how they'll deal with the stresses. And it was such a powerful experience for staff that they found themselves thinking and framing their year in a different way than they had done in the past. And so then my work partner and I facilitated a training for their staff, and then my students the following year went into their adolescent program and facilitating a training for their students, and we supported them in creating a model. And so I can't say enough about staff choice. And so if I had my druthers, I would really invite people who have experienced the work and who are choosing to do it, participate in learning about the work, because I think we have to get this work for ourselves. That's the words of one of my beloved teachers. You know, he has said, you've got to get this work for yourself first. And I hold that to my heart dearly. And so I think that's the case. And once teachers have the work and they're interested and they're learning it and practicing with each other and feel comfortable, then they can bring it to the classroom. I think the school, it's really helpful if it has a structure that supports this, whether it's monthly staff meetings or quarterly staff circles, or whether it's a simple check-in or different ways to solve problems. If there's an issue in the staff, or repair the harm circle. If we're collaborating and creating something, we can have a space to do that. But it's beyond that too. It's the way that we speak to each other. It's understanding that everyone is worthy of being in relationship with, and that, you know, thinking about our conversations and how are we really supporting ourselves and each other in the way that we're speaking and interacting. So it's a really deep process, and it's one that honors where we are in the moment, and it honors not just the individual but the community as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add? Okay. So just shifting gears a bit, I wanted to talk about the connections between school discipline efforts and public health. As we talked about in our blog post and again in the webinar on Tuesday, school climate and more specifically school discipline is very much a public health issue. I was wondering if, Ruth, you might be able to talk about how public health departments and healthcare or mental health providers can be effective partners to schools in creating trauma-informed environments or offering alternatives to disciplinary practices.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think in terms of so much of what Doreen and Heather have been sharing today, it's really about shifting to connections. And so and I have done several trainings and dialogues with school mental health providers, and I think one of the biggest challenges that they've reflected to me is a need to shift from mental health providers being in schools only to provide a counseling support and intervention and not be a part of supporting staff and family and students together in how those, trauma-informed practices or mental health supports could actually inform, relationships and, approaches to challenges overall. So I think, that would be the concrete thing that I would offer, is where there are partnerships between public health and county mental health departments in schools, that folks really look at giving some time for those mental health professionals or trauma-trained therapists to actually be working with the school and not just providing individual services. Thanks.
Oh, I'm so sorry, everyone. I was on mute. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ruth. Kind of segueing and continuing on the topic of building partnerships, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what outreach or coalition building strategies you would share with parents, with students, and educators who want to connect with community partners to build a movement to implement some of the strategies that we've talked about today.
Great. And this is Ruth. You want me to start on that?
Sure. Yes, that'd be
okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So first, we also work closely with a lot of youth organizing partners. One of our closest partners, Youth Justice Coalition, and they've done a lot to document how challenging it is to really work with a school as a community space. So I'd also love to hear from Heather and Doreen about how they might see their schools as community spaces as well. But we've been trying to push our local school districts to kind of ease some of the legal MOU burdens and even establishing partnerships, because I think there are so many resources in the community, and if we can bring them into schools and make more clear connections and having schools open until 10. So there's this vision from Youth Justice Coalition that is about sort of youth-centered community schools that would provide that prevention and intervention work. And then I think the other really key thing that I have learned in supporting parent leaders at Cadre in South LA is what it looks like to actually partner with families, partner with parents. We have this notion in education about family engagement, but what do shared leadership models actually look like? It means, creating access to information in a different way. So we have been a part a lot of community trainings and really breaking down, school budgets and school district policies, so families feel like they actually can walk into a school and say, I want to partner with you to look at school discipline data. So I think, seeing those partnerships as not just possible but necessary to transform school climate and culture are, to me, pretty key. Thanks.
Thank you. Heather or Doreen, did you have anything to add about how the community might be a helpful partner to the work that you do?
So, the thing that Doreen and I were just sort of discussing is how powerful it is to listen. And so when I think about, there's just two practical pieces I want to say about what we do here. We have an advisory council with our parents, and so parents are welcome to come in and participate in that process. So that's a structural piece where we have a monthly meeting, and we also have a parent center and a parent coordinator. And this is part of our practice as a district. But it's really how we think about it here. And so we have a new parent coordinator this year, and he'll be taught the work of restorative practice. And he's very interested, and I'm so excited because my students would like to facilitate a training for their parents so that their parents can facilitate circles in the school and the community. But what I wanted to say is what I really like to do with my students is look at what's important to them and see what issues rise up and have them do the research about what communities are what organizations are in the area, and then make connections with them, invite them to come sit with us. And so, there have been many opportunities. For example, we had the school district was working with a peer jury process, and this is early on when we were starting the work of restorative practices, and the person who was heading the work had invited our school to participate, and my students did, and my students felt that it was contrary to our philosophy and our way. And so much to the credit of the person who was heading that program, she came and she sat with my students and took their feedback about the program. And as a result of that, she, at the district level, worked with people to create the peer council model, which is based on community conferencing. And then that peer council model that I told you about earlier was what my students and I adapted to our community after that. So I really think it's, again, very important to come from within and to create those pathways for students to reach out and then invite people to reach in too. And so that's what we do. Doreen wants to say something too.
I just wanted to add a story if I could. I remember my freshman year, we do something that's called a freshman bridge. And I remember coming in and, they made us do, this scavenger hunt around the school, and you had to find where each classroom was, and then you come back and you do a circle. You bring your parents to freshman bridge as well. And I can remember my mom having her first experience with restorative practices and her sitting with other parents and listening to other parents tell other stories as to why they felt like Alliance would be a great space for their child. And I can remember hearing her talk with so much passion, and she was just so curious and so excited. And at the time when I first sat in circle, I'll be very honest, I was like, that was boring. Like, I should have been sitting in your circle because I was bored. I remember her just talking, you know, like, I know I'm not supposed to tell you anything that happened in the circle, but, you know, this parent kind of said something like this, and it was just, and I was like, well, you're breaking confidentiality, Mom. And it's crazy to think that a few years later, that just her having that experience and a few other experiences with restorative practices, that she would be so passionate and so proud to know of all the things that I was able to accomplish and things that I'm still accomplishing teaching restorative practices. So I just wanted to leave that story with you guys. It just was on my heart. I just felt like it was good for you guys to hear.
Thank you, Doreen.
Thank you. Thank you, Doreen. That was beautiful.
So we have about 5 minutes left, so I want to start wrapping up. And I just wanted to first thank Heather, Doreen, and Ruth for taking the time to participate today, for their honesty, their passion that's so apparent even over the phone, and just sharing their knowledge and expert insights on this. And I want to echo a couple key themes that I heard today. I think over and over again, just the importance of the power of listening, and I loved what Doreen said about listening without bias, about creating safe spaces of inclusiveness, and the importance of building relationships with students, with parents, teachers, partners in the community, and really working together or with these partners, not to or for, as Heather said. And I think this work is, by no means a single-handed undertaking. It really does require meaningful collaboration that includes students in these important conversations, collaboration that really addresses teachers' concerns when it comes to classroom management, and really ensures that they feel supported. And I think collaboration that also engages the broader community, including public health advocates and healthcare providers, as we kind of talked about a bit today. And I think a takeaway for me too is that for those of us working in the policy space and might be one or two layers kind of removed from this important on-the-ground work, it's really important to just listen to people who are walking into classrooms and onto playgrounds every day. And I think their message is very clear and very beautiful and very real, and it's a message of inclusion, again, of listening, and of course healing. So thank you all again. And with that, I just wanted to say that next in our series is a bonus webinar, and it will explore the role of preemption in public health legal and policy efforts alongside resources for local solutions. So be sure to join us, and that will be on October 6th. And then I want to acknowledge that we weren't able to cover all the questions that we received from everyone. So if we didn't have a chance to get to that today, I'll be sharing our speakers' contact information shortly. So feel free to reach out to us. I also wanted to flag some resources that you may find useful if you're interested in learning more about some of the promising practices and strategies we talked about today. If you haven't already, be sure to check out Public Counsel's 6 Schools Discipline. It has a tremendous wealth of resources, including toolkits, webinars, and other useful resources for anyone interested in learning how to implement or advocate for supportive, inclusive discipline policies. And then for our students in the audience and all of us who work closely with them, be sure to check out our publication, Pathways to Policy. It's a step-by-step playbook to support young people in their pursuit of a better world. And you can download this for free from our website, ChangeLabSolutions.org. And then to learn more about how school discipline is both a public health crisis and opportunity, keep an eye out for our upcoming issue brief, which will be released next month. And then if you don't happen to see what you're looking for from this list of materials, feel free to reach out to us for technical assistance, and we may be able to help you. And then finally, I just want to encourage everyone to keep this conversation going. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email addresses are all here, and share your questions or comments with us. And then as soon as this panel ends, you'll be directed to a very quick follow-up survey. Please just take 2 or 3 minutes to share your feedback with us on this episode or the series as a whole. And then the recording for this panel will also be available soon, and you'll receive a follow-up email notifying you when that is. So with that, I just want to thank you all so much again for joining us. Thank you.